All right, welcome back to the Ottawa studios of Inside My Canoe Head. I am your host, Dr. D. We're well into 2025, or at least the first week or so of this year. I hope you're having a grand time and things are working out for you. Listen, today we're going to talk about you want to be a prepper. One of your New Year's resolutions is to adopt preparedness, but you want to go exponentially large and become a prepper. So sit back, grab yourself your favorite beverage. We're going to tell you how. All right, welcome back again, and thank you for joining us here on the podcast. We appreciate all of your feedback over at www.insidemycanoehead.ca. Everything you need is there, all the podcast episodes. Hey, you can start off the new year by being kind and buy me a cup of black coffee. I love it. It's a simple way to support the podcast. If you love what you hear, we don't have subscription models or anything crazy like that. Just jump over to Buy Me a Coffee. Buy me a $5 coffee, and I'd greatly appreciate it. So, it's a new year. Everybody's enjoying it. We're all having a grand time of fun. I tell you, let's be a prepper, right? Everybody looks at them, Doomsday Preppers. We've seen them on TV. We've seen all kinds of, and for a long time, they had a really bad name. And then once the pandemic came around, a lot of people started talking about preparedness. A lot of people going, hey, maybe the preppers aren't that crazy. Well, we're going to take preparedness to the exponential level here today. We're going to talk about how to become a prepper, what a prepper is, how do preppers view the world, and what do you need to do to find a group? How do you find other preppers that are in your neighborhood and start your clandestine preparedness group, including if you want to get to the stage of having an off-site location that you will evacuate to with all the other preppers. So that's what we're going to do today. But first, what is a prepper? Now, there are a number of really interesting definitions that are out there. I don't think there's really an academically accepted homogeneous definition in the peer-reviewed literature on what a prepper is. I think it's very much situation agnostic. But let's put it this way. Here at Preparedness Labs Incorporated, I've worked on a 5-stage level of how to define an individual in the scheme of preparedness. So I'll go through the 5 and explain them briefly what they are, and then we'll dive down the train of preppers. On the far left, you have blissfully unaware. This is an individual who just doesn't have a clue about preparedness. It's not something that they think about. They just wildly go through life and get punched up the head periodically, and they're fairly useless for themselves, but they just don't understand, don't care, not aware, etc. Just blissfully unaware folks. We all know them. The second stage is your government dependent. These are your people who believe in the 72-hour kits, 72-hour missions, be prepared for 72 hours, and all that other stuff that you hear. But they're dependent on the government to come rescue them in significant situations, right? That's the dangerous group. That's the people who think if I buy some supplies in my basement and I have a few emergency kits and I listen to my wind-up radio, that somehow I'm going to be able to navigate disasters. It's a professional victimhood, but those people are out there, and that's a very precariously dangerous position to be in. The second one is what we call a prepared individual. This is the goal of the podcast here, right? This is the goal of all of the work that I do at Preparedness Labs Incorporated. The thousands of pages that I've written and published is all about getting people to persuade to become what's called a prepared individual. And that person can generally be described as somebody who accepts personal responsibility for their outcome. They've taken a look at around them, and they've taken reasonable measures and steps to be ready to tackle the world and events that may happen. And they've done through a reflection of their exposure to and dependency on critical infrastructure, and they have a trifecta of preparedness plans. One for the most likely least dangerous event, one for the most dangerous and least likely event, and then one for losing their jobs and being financially on their own. Once they have those done and then they carry on with life, they see preparedness as wrapping themselves in a blanket of insulation, right? So that basically means they're going to chase their dreams, they're going to go after it, but they've taken the necessary steps in preparedness to protect against shocks and punches upside the head that life and the world offers that are beyond their control. That's the middle ground. That's what we aim for here. Rational, intelligent individuals. The next stage, my friend, is your prepper. Now, when you move into the world of prepper, in general, we categorize that as an individual who believes there is a likelihood that there will be a significant disruption in normal societal operations, that it might extend up to 30 days or beyond, and that in the future, though, that will come back. So a prepper is somebody who is concerned about the fact that society will take a knee. It won't collapse, but it will take a knee, in all 10 sectors of critical infrastructure will fail, and fail probably in a cascading form, and will be down for 30, 60, or 90 days, but that society will eventually get itself back up and restore itself to what it was before. But there's going to be a significant, a prolonged, painful series of events that will significantly, if not profoundly, impact their ability to conduct their normal operations. A prepper sees that as a likely possible outcome, and then they deal with it. We'll get into shortly how they deal with it. Then we get into the world of survivalists. The last person on the end is the survivalist. Now, a survivalist is an individual who believes the same as a prepper, that society is going to take a knee. But the difference with the survivalist is they believe society will not recover. It will restore to a tribal sense of 1500 feudal England and little tribes of people, but the national organizational government will go down, and it will stay down permanently. So think about your 10 sectors of critical infrastructure, 16 in the United States of America. Sometimes they're called lifelines, and each one of those take a knee, as we say in the Army. They collapse and they disappear and they don't come back. That's a survivalist. So they believe that a societal collapse is likely, is going to happen, and their preparedness frame they look through the world is, I have to be ready to take care of absolutely everything for time immemorial for the whomever I'm responsible for. So that's the spectrum we built, and people usually move between the spectrum, but really we target people to adopt a prepared life. And our video course that we have available at preparednesslabs.ca, it's for $199 and a lot less American. And we have monthly webinars that goes on with that. It's a traditional 30-30 format for the webinars that are just really cool. That's 30 minutes of me talking about what just happened in the last 30 days relative to preparedness. What are the latest ideas coming out of the peer-reviewed research? What are we learning about recent experiments around disasters? Like real useful information. And then the last 30 minutes is question and answers from people. So setting that aside, preppers. We love preppers. They're amazing, wonderful people. They are individuals who, as I said, believe that society is going to take a knee for a reasonably significant period of time. Now, what the prepper does is they understand that it is their responsibility to replicate the provision of those sectors of critical infrastructure. Remember, a prepared individual is somebody who understands that critical infrastructure will go down and understands how they're going to navigate life without access to it. When you make the step over to a prepper, that conversation changes from the critical infrastructure's taking a knee and going down. Now the conversation moves to, I need to be able to replicate those sectors of critical infrastructure to the greatest extent possible for an extended period of time, right? So, for example, a prepper would be somebody, if the power utility went down, so a prepared individual, when the power utility goes down, they've figured out a plan to navigate a loss for up to 14 days, which is our recommended timeline. How do you carry on? So they may have a slight backup. They may have, a Jackery battery system. They may have a generator, etc. A prepper looks through it and says, when the power system goes down, it's likely to be down for months on end. How do I prepare? How do I create the conditions where I can generate all the power my family needs for 3 months, for 4 months, for 5 months? Now you're talking a completely different scheme and idea about replication of sectors of critical infrastructure, right? So that's how a prepper mindset changes. They not only become responsible for bumps in the road, they become responsible for long term. So, for example, you start thinking it through all the sectors of critical infrastructure. Think about food and water. right? A prepared individual might say, hey, listen, I want to have appropriate food and water in my shelter in place for 14 days as recommended by the guys at Preparedness Labs Incorporated. That's great, right? A prepper says, what about 6 months? What if the food system goes down and I don't have access to farmers markets, I don't have access to grocery stores, and there's no distribution of food available? How do I intend to feed my family for the next 3 to 4 months until the system goes up? They're generally individuals who have access to food systems outside of the normal thing. So hunters, gatherers, people who have what they used to call in the World War times in the 1940s, they called them victory gardens, right? It's the old saying of grow it, don't mow it. So your front yard basically becomes a non-stop garden. So you're not mowing your front lawn to have a nice lawn for your neighbors. It's actually nothing but an entire sea of planting boxes, and you get 60 to 80% of your calories off of your city lot, right? And then you hunt for your meat, you fish for your meat. You start to see preppers are individuals who understand that they can't simply rely on a government-managed or commercially managed grocery store system and just assume that it's always going to be there, right? So again, the prepper mentality is all about the replication of the sectors of critical infrastructure for an extended failure. They generate their own power. They generate their own water. They generate their own food. They have significant usual additional medical training. And they have significant additional medical supplies to deal with that. And this is where people start to push past the 14-day limit. This is where people start to look at the considerations and say, hey, I need to have quite a number more weeks of stores in my house. So as you think like a prepper, you start to move that timeline beyond 14 days. Now, I've said publicly here on the podcast, my timeline is 90 days. So you can cut my house off from the external world. So no utilities, no access to any normal occurrences or provisions that are available in a normal city for 90 days. And I can provide food, water, shelter, health, safety, and security for those for whom I'm responsible in my residence, right? That obviously presumes that my residence remains available to me. It's not taken down in an earthquake or a wildfire or something like that. So assuming that, which we'll get into alternate locations in a minute, the prepper looks at that and says, okay, I'm good for 90 days, right? So then you ask yourself, how? Is there some nomenclature ideology to this, or is there some different organizational system? And I'll give you the organizational system that I use that some other preppers may consider. When we talk about staying and sheltering in place, we know that we can shelter in place for an extended period of time because we've decided that we're going to be responsible for the provision of the 10 sectors of critical infrastructure. However, we also understand that there may come a time when our home is no longer an appropriate place to shelter for our family. This can be due to a whole bunch of other concerns. If you live in high density housing and you have 3 months of food and you're eating and nobody around you is eating, that can become uncomfortable fairly quickly. Now, you can do your best to hide it, etc., but if you're not gaunt and hungry and angry and pissed off at the system and complaining about everybody and you seem to be throwing out garbage, you start to understand how after 30 days of nobody having access to normal systems in the neighborhood, people are going to be hungry, they're going to be angry, they're going to be upset, and you're doing just fine. That may not be a safe place for you to exist. So how preppers organize, and the system that I use, is I go 30, 30, 30. So 30 days of food, the first 30 days of all supplies. So my first 30 days of preparedness is just my normal life, right? It's the normal food that I eat. So my kitchen has 30 days worth of meals in the pantry. Full stop. Doesn't matter what you eat, right? But again, if you've taken our video course or read the book, you understand that when you think about food is a system. So it's acquiring the food, it's storing the food, it's cooking the food, and it's disposing of the food, right? So when I say 30 days of food, I mean 30 days to operate that system, which means I need to be able to heat and cook food. So if I'm going to do that, and remember, I don't have access to utilities, so whether that's on an open fire pit in my backyard, whether that's on a grill on my barbecue, or a side burner on my barbecue, or a couple of camping stoves, however I decide to do that, I have 30 full days of normal operation in this house, right? Full stop, doesn't matter. You can shut off all the utilities and I can feed everybody and run this place exactly the way it was running with the utilities hooked up for 30 days. At a certain point, we move into the second 30 days. And what a prepper does in the second 30 days is this starts in reduced access to utilities. So, for example, I don't run a gas generator. But if I needed to run a gas generator to provide supplies, after 30 days, we're starting to talk into the hundreds of liters of fuel. And remember, fuel comes out of the ground at a gas station because the gas station has power. Eventually, 30 days after a collapse or a shutdown of society, what's going to happen? Well, you're probably not going to have access to any gasoline stations. There's no gasoline being delivered to stations because most countries have fuel programs for these type of situations. In fact, they're pretty robust here in Canada in the national fuel strategy when it comes to securing it for critical infrastructure needs. What you're not going to be able to store, I live in a townhouse, right? I've said that. Yeah, I live in an N-unit townhouse. I can't store 400 liters of gasoline in my backyard, right? And that's probably only going to be 30 days worth, right? So there's a point where the first 30 days of normal operations has to take a change. The second 30 days of my operations are based upon non-fuel access, so no additional additives. So I can continue to provide food, water, shelter, health, safety, and security for those for whom I'm responsible without needing fuel sources, which means as I move into the next 30 days of storage, supplies, and operations, it's not using external fuel beyond solar. Now, I generate all my power by solar. I've said this before. It's not a big secret. I don't have a large solar system because when I went through my assessment, my minimum power profile that I assessed for my family was actually pretty freaking low, and it remains low. And so because of that, I now only need very little. So I have 200 watts of solar and one lithium power bank, a very cheap one. It's only a Jackery 500. It's not a big one. I don't need 3,000 watts of power. So that is my time immemorial. And with solar, you know, as long as the sun's still shining, and that's a whole different problem if it's not. As long as the sun is still shining, I can generate all the power time immemorial that my family needs, and it's not fuel sustainable. When I switch over, the fuel that I do use in the next 30 days is readily and easily available where I live, right? I live in Canada in the boreal forest. What do we have? We have a crap ton of wood. So now heat, cooking, and all that thing moves to a wooden fuel source. That wooden fuel source is readily available and will never run out. I live in a freaking country that has, 27 times the sink of our carbon emissions, right? Canada is carbon neutral 27 times over when you consider the amount of carbon absorbed by our forest, right? I have tons of fuel. If you live in downtown Toronto, you might not, but where I live, on the outskirts of the city of Ottawa, I have all access to the fuel. So in the second 30 days, the prepper moves to reduced fuel or renewable fuels only. When you move to renewable fuel only, that means should you be able to stay in your residence, which is what everybody hopes for shelter in place, now as a prepper, I am able to maintain heat, food, water, all that through using natural renewable fuels. So I get all my power from the sun and I get all my heat and my food cooking from burning wood. Now, does that have considerations? Yeah, it takes a lot longer, and it is actually an art to learn how to cook by using renewable fuels. So you need to learn how to do that before the cataclysmic event happens, because otherwise you're going to burn a lot of food and cheese off a lot of people, right? So it's a skill set. So the second period of time that we move into, for me, it's 30 days, but for others, they have different timelines. The second period of time is all based on using renewable energy. That's how most preppers categorize it. When you move into stage 2, let's call it, of your prepper life, you move into renewables, which means if you can remain access to your residence and it remains a secure location and a safe location for your family. Because remember, you can't control what's going on in the world around you. You may have a perfectly safe location that becomes unsafe for a whole bunch of things you don't control. And no, I'm not getting into gangs of marauding individuals. There's just life situations that happen around you that you may decide that it's not an appropriate place for your family anymore. But when a prepper makes that switch over to the second 30 days, or as I call stage 2, for me it's 30-30-30. Other people it will be different, but we'll use myself as an example. When I'm into stage 2 is my ability to extend on renewables. Now, if I could stay in my residence and I had a greater food storage, I could stay in stage 2 forever. Right? If I had the ability to grow my own food and harvest through hunting and fishing, remaining on my land, this is the point where preppers are quite capable of waiting out the reorganization and the restarting of society. So we could have a shutdown of 6 months of all major systems in our society, and a prepper would be able to generate sufficient amount of food on their land. Remember, preppers are not just about storing 2 years of canned food in the basement. That's more of a prepared individual on steroids. When you switch to the prepper mentality, you very much move to the conversation of replicating the food system, which means you're not just storing 2 years of food. And most preppers that I know actually don't do that. What they have is the ability to generate their own food year in, year out. Right? So they'll generate and grow. And I know preppers who live in townhouses like I do and have a backyard garden that's nothing more than herbs. What they go out and do is at harvest time, when everything is really dirt cheap, they buy several 50-pound bags of potatoes. They buy half a cow, and then they buy all of these massive massive vegetables that you can buy in huge bags for super discount prices at the end of harvest. And then they sit in their kitchen for a week and they process the winter food, put it in jars and put it up, and they're good to go. So it's about being able to replicate the food system. So if you can replicate the food system for sufficient nutritional density for you and those for whom you're responsible, then you can stay in stage 2 prepping forever, right? You can just keep going. Now, forever for a prepper means that society is going to rectify and set itself back up 3, 4, 6 months down the line. Stage 3 prepping, as I like to refer to it, or for me, the third 30, is my mobility discussion, right? I live in a high density living area in a city of 1 million people. When I reach the 60-day point of staying in this residence, I can't remain here. I'm pretty certain that this environment in which I live right now, knowing the other lack of preparedness in the 1 million people around me, that at 30 days, it's going to become difficult. But by the end of the 60 days, my family will have to leave. We will not be able to stay here and safely continue our normal operations, right? So I have 30, 30, and 30 set up in my prepper, in my preparedness supplies. The last 30 is all mobility. Every one of it is light and mobile. I have an entire system designed to relocate my household, right, on short notice with 30 days of supplies, right? So I have 30 days of food and water. Well, water is pretty easy. I live in the boreal forest. You can get water anywhere around here. So water, I don't carry around 30 days worth of water for people because that's hundreds, if not thousands of pounds. What I do carry is the ability to make water. I can dip water that's covered, that has gasoline soaked puddles on the side of the road, and I can make fresh water out of it, right? Not a worry, not concerned at all. So I have the ability to make fresh water, but I have 30 days of food freeze dried. That is very easy, very light, and very simple to move for my family. And then all of my robust first aid supplies and my robust other supplies can be transformed into a mobile unit, including my ability to generate heat and cook, can all be made mobile, right? So the last 30 that I have is mobility. It's all at that 60 days. If society for me at 60 days has not rectified itself, I now must be mobile. And I have a place to go, and we'll discuss about that in a second, but that's the point. So for some people, that's going to be a longer period. Some preppers have 6 months of supplies in their house. When they move over to the renewable stage for cooking, energy, etc., remember, this is for sanitation as well. As much as we don't like to talk about it, one of the things that gets people in trouble the first and causes disease is your inability to deal with human waste. If you live like I do in an end unit townhouse in a city of 1 million people, how are you going to dispose of waste? You can't assume the sewer system will be available to you. What if it's not? How are you going to, number one, go to the bathroom, and then how are you going to deal with it? That's as much as a concern as it is as food, right? Food comes in the system, food leaves the system, and as a prepper, you need to be able to deal with, absolutely without question, all of the human waste that your family will produce. What do you do with it? Where does it go? So Prepper has a full spectrum for all parts, all 10 sectors of critical infrastructure, which, my friends, includes sanitation. When you go mobile and you make that choice, you have to have the ability to be mobile, right? So when you have to relocate, if relocation is part of your Prepper plan, how do you get there? So you're going to assume that you're going to have access to a car, and you're going to assume that you are going to have access to roads that you can use, and that you are going to be using gasoline. Now, there are some crazy draconian laws in some countries that might say after 30 days, personal vehicle travel is no longer permitted. So if you think you're going to jump into your car with your prepper supplies and drive to your off-site location when the authorities have said the roads are closed to all but necessary traffic, you get stopped. Your plan is junk. So you better make sure you're aware of exactly what your government intends to do in times of these, or pay attention to the words that are being used and the phrases. When the government starts to talk about mobility restrictions on inhabitants, that's probably your key to make your decision. We go now, or we're not going to be able to go via car. Now, you may be able to go through back roads, back routes. I'm not going to get into these crazy ideas that you may have. I'm just saying there may be external influences that prevent you from being able to place your family into your car or your prepper jacked up pickup truck and drive to your alternate location. Pay attention to the world around you. Remember, preparedness is about insulating you from exogenous shocks beyond your control. You can't influence when your country or when your city puts mobility restrictions, aka look at what happened in the pandemic. And they may do that, and they've done it in the past. So if they do it, you need to be bloody well ready to act when they do it, or you may be physically stuck where you are when you hit that end of the period where you feel safe, but your ability to actually move has been withdrawn from you by your government. Pay attention. Not a big bad government. Government is evil thing. It's about paying attention to the situation around you, understanding decisions that may be made, and using those to make an informed decision for your family. Now, when you go into the mobility stage of preparedness, as a prepper, this is where you are relocating your family to an alternate location. This is where I'm going to introduce the idea of groups. We've talked about before, and I continually talk about on this podcast, that the lone wolf perishes and the pack survives. It's how nature works. Humans are tribal animals. We're only successful in groups. We have done since time immemorial. Now our modern society has kind of split us off into this world of individuals. But let's be clear, we do better as groups. So we always advocate for, as soon as you accept personal responsibility for your outcomes as the number one step in preparedness, the number one thing you can do to help grow your preparedness is go meet your neighbor, because social networks are the real emergency kits. And as a prepper, that doesn't change at all, right? So as a prepper, you will be successful if you have like-minded individuals. It is very, very difficult for you to be a lone wolf prepper, to try to do everything that your family needs on your own as a singular individual without any assistance, anybody else to talk to, anybody else who's doing the same activities that you are, right? So how to find a prepper group or how to create one. One is to start a preparedness conversation. And I talk about this in our online course when it's talking about building community. Somebody has to be a champion. Somebody has to send an email out through a Facebook group or something saying, hey, I'm so-and-so. I live in this neighborhood, without giving your exact location. I live in a world of preparedness. I'm concerned about preparedness. Does anybody else out there think about that and would like to jump on a Zoom call to talk about that? You're going to get some idiots, absolutely, but you're going to realize really quickly that you're not the only crazy in the neighborhood, right? That there are quite a number of other people who are talking about it. Through those conversations over time, you'll start to read the room and understand that there are people who think it's a bigger concern than just 3 days without power in a winter storm. You'll start to have those conversations. And as you build trusting relationships, and because I say social networks are the real emergency kits, they're based on trusted relationships. I'm not going to tell you how to trust somebody. You figure that out now by being an adult. But over time, as you build relationships and you get to know people better, you'll start to figure out who you can trust and who you can't. And when you trust people in the preparedness space, that's when the conversation can step over the line into, have you thought about being a prepper, right? Have you thought about being a little bit more prepared than 14 days or 3 days or something along that lines, and begin that conversation? Because most established prepper groups don't have open Facebook groups, right? You can't just sign up and join the prepper group for your neighborhood, because probably they're not announcing it. And I'm likely going to tell you they probably exist, but they're not publicly facing, right? And there may be the guy with the jacked up pickup truck and all that cool gear attached to the outside of it. But I'm going to suggest to you, most preppers, and every prepper that I know is like this, they're the gray man or gray woman. I don't care about your gender neutrality. They're the gray man, which means they don't overtly demonstrate to the world around them that they're a prepper. They don't drive big jacked up 4Runners with all these skid plates on the side and axes and shovels attached to the side of them. Most preppers don't do that, right? They drive normal sedans or maybe a Subaru, right? Like seriously, or they may have a regular Ford F-150 pickup truck. Preppers are not overtly able out there. They're not somebody who you look in their backyard and there's, in their tiny little townhouse backyard, there's this massive food forest. Most preppers don't work like that. They're the gray man. So it's going to be difficult for you to walk around the neighborhood and go, aha, a prepper lives there. I got you, big fella. Right? So you're going to find and search that out. When you start to build your crowd, when you start to build it, then you can start having that conversation about, what does an off-grid location look like for us? And when I mean off-grid, I mean secondary. Not necessarily, but by then you're going to be off grid because the grid's going to be down. The idea of having a secondary location is a safe place that you and the rest of your group can come together when it gets to that point where you no longer feel safe, or you think your ability to leave your home is going to be restricted. That's the time to go. And to have a place to go to is a bold prepper move. It is a common part of the conversation in prepper groups. And the group that I belong to is most certainly the same. That group, that I belong to, we have a secondary location that is suitable for long-term life, right? So there's enough space, enough other stuff, let's put it that way, that will allow us to stay there until such a time as society reorganizes itself, it's safe to rectify, and that and society steps back up, and we can go back to our normal lives, go back to our homes, etc., and kick off with what we did before, and have great beers and conversations about life. But a secondary location is simply that. It's a place for you and other members of a prepper group to relocate, not to dig in and dig trenches and do night patrolling. And dude, you're not going to face a whole bunch of running gun marauders, right? You can live in that world if you want to. I'm simply talking about getting away from threat environments or places, or moving before the government tells you cannot move. Because again, trying to fight your way through a government roadblock is a cool movie about an ex-Delta Force guy. But that's not really the way the world works. It's not going to be successful for you. Having another location may simply be that one of your prepper group friends lives on a 3-acre property on the edge of town, which is just a little bit more comfortable than people that may live in high density housing downtown, right? You could literally live, and I have one prepper friend who lives in a condo. And they are a prepper, absolutely no doubt whatsoever, top to bottom, left to right. And they live in a condo. You can be a prepper in a condo, not a problem. They have a mobility plan. And their mobility plan is to get to this alternate location where it's a little bit easier for them to take care of themselves and their family. And they have mobility stocks like I do. And so when you think about it that way, you start to realize that this isn't about restarting society on your own and getting your own little co-op loveland and this, defensible place, like you're going to call it the Jeff Ranch, where we defend it at all costs. The ideology is simply saying that there may come a time while you're waiting for society to restart that it becomes unstable or unsafe for you and your family due to events beyond your control. And it's not from people looting and robbing. It may just be that there's a wildfire burning out of control and the city's fire department is shut down. And so nobody's there to fight it. Or if you live like me in a townhouse, that buddy 3 stories up or 3 houses down just lit his house on fire because he was doing dumb crap in the inside of the house, and there's no fire department to put it out, and you and the neighbors couldn't get her out. And so, in the next hour or so, your house is going to catch on fire and burn down, right? So it's not just this ideology of marauding, gun-toting folks on the street. I think that's funny, but whatever. If you don't think it's funny, or you live in a country where you really think that's a possibility, then obviously you got to prepare for it. But that's the idea of having the group with the preppers. And you build that through that trusted relationship, a common group of people, and you scope it out. Now, here in Canada, private land is probably your best bet, because we saw in the pandemic, good, bad, or indifferent, I don't care what your opinion is of the government and their actions, that they restricted camping on Crown land. Now, Crown land is our public land. In America, it's called government land or BLM managed land or whatever it may be. But our initial idea as a group was, we're just going to go to some Crown land. We identified a bunch of areas outside the city, and we're just going to go there and basically camp, for lack of a better term, out of the back of our cars and our trailers, and we'll just kind of hang out there. It's a bit safer than being in the city and waiting for stuff to fix itself up. The pandemic shut that down because the Crown, actually, our government went to what I think is an absolutely ridiculous idea, saying people couldn't camp on Crown land. All of a sudden, they took away our access to 97% of the landmass of this country. Incredible that somebody would even think that the government would have the audacity to do that, but they did it, which means I can't consider Crown government public land as a place to camp on as a strategy for preparedness, because my government now has had the audacity to do it before, which means they're likely to do it again. So private land is likely the only way to do it. Now, finding private land, making a deal with a farmer, something along that lines, there's lots of ways to do it. My group has private land through a different system, but Another group that I'm aware of, I've never visited them, but I'm aware of them, made a deal with a farmer. And basically the farmer has, a quarter section, and I think it's like a couple 100 acres, and they farm. And so basically there's a rough kind of patch that's maybe 5 or 6 acres, and it has a bit of a side, road down to it. And this group basically come out and help out the farmer once a year during harvest, do some odd things. They basically trade labor for access. So if they had to leave the city on short notice, they could come to this farmer's land, to this area of the land, and use it. And so this group, now, again, I've not verified this, but this is what I'm being told. The only improvements the group did is they took care of sanitation. So they dug and installed a proper 2-hole outhouse, right? Just because that's the number one thing that caused diseases and problems. And then they dropped a small sea container out there with some things that they thought would be helpful. And they leave it there. And they periodically go out and they visit. But again, this is a reciprocal agreement. The farmer doesn't have to do anything. The farmer doesn't support it other than giving them access to a piece of land on private property, which means the government cannot influence that. And these people periodically come out and visit. It gives some extra-handed harvest when the farmer needs it. And then the farmer gets the confidence that knowing in really difficult societal times, there's likely to be another group of people that are friendly, trustworthy, that are nearby, that can help out, that I can help out. We can have reciprocal norms of reciprocity and help each other out. That's a way they did it. This is what I'm told. I've never verified it. My group of colleagues that in our strategy have a different way of looking at things. The point being is that if you want to go prepper, and we'll summate on this, if you want to go prepper, it's about understanding the leap you're making from a prepared individual is your ability to replicate the 10 sectors of critical infrastructure for a time exceeding 14 days. And that not mean for short period of time, that means time immemorial to a certain extent. Right? So in other words, you can't sit back and rely on generator fuel because you're going to have like a 2,000 liter tank or a 4,000 liter tank, right? It's about how do I replicate the 10 sectors of critical infrastructure to some degree, time immemorial, so that I can continue to support the normal operations of my family. And that's usually in the field of food, water, shelter, health, safety, and security, your basic animalistic requirements. So that's how you go prepper. That's the attitude. You get to start a preparedness group, potentially a prepper group. You might even consider an offsite location, but you've made that mental switch that you believe there's a likely possibility that society is going to take a knee for longer than 14 days, but that it will at some time in the future come back up. And that so for an extended period of time, you're responsible for the provision of 10 sectors of critical infrastructure to you, your family, and those for whom you're responsible. Hopefully you enjoyed this. Hopefully you want to go full prepper. It's a lot of fun. Thanks for joining us this week at Inside My Canoe Head. Stay tuned. I hope you're setting up 2025 for an incredible year. Let's get after it. Take care and stay safe.